Welcome folks, this is going to be a super relaxed video. I'm not going to lie, this is a bit of a treat for myself as well after some of the recent big investigations. Because this time I'm just taking some time to soak up the history and vibes of Cyrodiil and specifically its major cities. We're going to do a proper tour looking at each of these unique settlements, their history, their architecture, all of that lovely stuff. I'll set expectations early and say now that I won't be covering absolutely every single fact known to mankind about these cities. Think of this as a vibey, comfy, relaxed tour of the sites, something to kick back and enjoy going along the journey with me. Before we crack on with our tour, I want to thank the channel members and Patreon supporters who help make these long-form videos possible. And I want to encourage you to like, share, hype, comment and subscribe to the channel. Every single little thing you do has a hugely positive impact and is really appreciated. So we begin our tour of Cyrodiil's cities in the north of the province, just below Skyrim, with Bruma. This frostbitten settlement sits high in the Chorrol mountains of northern Cyrodiil, north of the Imperial City along the Silver Road. The Orange Road links it southwest to Chorrol, while Cloud Ruler Temple lies nearby to the northwest. It is, in practical terms, the Empire's northern threshold, cold, elevated and permanently snow-covered. The climate visually defines the city immediately. Unlike the greener, river-bound settlements of central Cyrodiil, Bruma feels carved into frost and stone. Although officially a Nibonese city, Bruma's population is primarily Nordic. That dual identity shapes everything about it. Architecturally, the city reflects the influence of nearby Skyrim. Timbered structures, steep roofing suited to snow, heavy wooden beams, and generally more austere, functional character than the ornamented cities of the Nibonese Basin. Culturally too, there is a blend. Many citizens follow the divines, yet some adhere to the traditional Nordic pantheon. The result is not tension so much as a layering of cultures. Bruma feels like a frontier city where Cyrodiil and Skyrim's traditions overlap rather than compete for dominance. At the centre of the city stands the great chapel of Talos, dominating Bruma both physically and symbolically. Talos, the youngest of the 9 divines, occupies a unique position in Nordic reverence, and his prominence here is not accidental. The chapel anchors the city in faith and identity. During the events of the Oblivion Crisis, the stone of Saint Alessia was stolen from this very chapel by bandits, who were then themselves robbed by ogres, with a quest requiring the player to recover the stone. This interesting little side note ties Bruma directly into one of the major religious crimes of the era. Politically, Bruma is ruled from Castle Bruma by Countess Narina Carvain, a Nibonese heartlander of noble descent. This governance places a Cyrodiilic aristocrat at the head of what is culturally a Nordic city, again reinforcing that layered identity mentioned earlier. Castle Bruma itself is far more than a decorative structure, of course, as it functions as the administrative heart of County Bruma and becomes strategically vital during the Oblivion Crisis. Historically, Bruma's roots stretch deep into the First Era. Records note a beggar king of Brumat present at the court of the young Riemann I. That archaic name, Brumat or Brumath depending on the source, confirms the settlement's antiquity. By the Second Era, Bruma was already strategically significant. During Varen's rebellion, it served as a base for Colovian troops. The Second Legion was stationed nearby in peacetime despite originating from the Gold Coast, reinforcing Bruma's military importance as a northern stronghold. The city unfortunately did not avoid devastation. During the Three Banners War, Orpheon the Tactician besieged Bruma. For a fortnight, siege engines battered its walls before flame dancer Ajim Ray set fire to buildings within. The city was sacked as part of Orpheon's campaign that briefly elevated him to the Ruby Throne. Bruma became neutral ground, though initially under Daggerfall Covenant control. It endured attack by Dremora and Shadowed Path cultists during the Plane Meld. A dark anchor was opened above the city in an attempt to drag it into Cold Harbour. Citizens barricaded themselves within key buildings and appeals for aid went out to rival alliances. With assistance, the dark anchor was lifted and the city reclaimed. By the Third Era, Bruma once again found itself at the centre of catastrophe. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Mythic Dawn planned to repeat the destruction of Kvatch by opening a great gate outside Bruma's walls. The Blades uncovered the plan, yet Martin's Septum allowed it to proceed in order to obtain a great sigil stone. Soldiers from across Cyrodiil rallied to the city. The resulting defence of Bruma became one of the defining battles of the crisis. The Great Gate was opened, Daedric forces surged, and the hero of Kvatch entered the Deadlands to retrieve the sigil stone. A statue commemorating the hero would later stand near the city's north gate, depicting whatever equipment the champion bore at that historic moment. The Oblivion Crisis was not the only calamity of that year. The Bruma Mages Guild was burned to the ground in a surprise assault by the Order of the Black Worm, so even within victory, Bruma suffered loss. Moving away from the history and looking at the city physically, Bruma is structured around several key institutions. Alongside the already mentioned Castle Bruma and the Great Chapel of Talos stand the Fighters Guild and the Mages Guild, both active during the Third Era. Prior to its destruction, the Mages Guild branch once offered spells across every school of magic, including the exclusive Summoned Remora Lord spell, which is unavailable after the place is burned down. Jean Frasoric leads the branch, with mages such as Giscar, Volinaro, Selena Orania and Camilla Lolia associated with it. The Fighters Guild, while not being one of the more important branches during the game, includes trainers such as Bumf Gragash and Rightwind, as well as a porter who can assist with repair, reinforcing Bruma's martial credentials, and not much else. Although there is an interesting cryptic note in the basement, which seems to be some kind of treasure map. Commerce in Bruma is practical and direct. Hammer and Axe and Nordwinds provide blacksmithing services, Nova Roma serves as a general store, Wild Eye Stables handles transport, the Geraldview Inn and Olav's Tap and Tack provide lodging. Ongar the World Weary operates as a fence for the Thieves Guild, embedding criminal networks quietly within the city's underbelly. Residential homes are modest but numerous, with houses belonging to its various citizens dotted about the place. So, as we ready ourselves for the next stop on our tour, we can take a moment to perceive Bruma as a whole entity rather than its constituent parts. What is its general character? Well, despite its repeated sieges and crises, it seems that Bruma persists. It's a city defined by that endurance as much as the cold. Snow, stone, chapel, castle and road, that is its composition. But beyond simple stuff, the place is much more than that in its heart and history. It has been sacked, burned, invaded by Daedra, nearly drawn into Cold Harbour and used as the Empire's shield against the Deadlands. Yet, as far as we can tell, even by the time of Skyrim, it remains a functioning settlement. We now take the Orange Road west to Chorrol, a Colovian town in northwestern Cyrodiil, sitting where the Great Forest meets the rougher Colovian highlands near the Hammerfell border. The surrounding landscape is boulder-strewn with large oak canopies shading its streets, giving a lovely feeling of a town set into woodland and rock rather than open farmland. Thick walls and watchtowers ring the settlement. We can clearly see it's a place built with defence firmly in mind. Within those walls, the defining landmark is a single enormous tree, the great oak at the heart of town. Chorrol is divided into 5 main districts: Fountain Gate by the main entrance, Castle Chorrol around the seat of power, Chapel Street near the religious quarter, West Chorrol, and Great Oak Place clustered around the central tree. The Great Chapel of Stendarr dominates the skyline. Stendarr has had a chapel here since at least the First Era. The chapel itself serves as the focal point for Stendarr's Mercy, a part of the Knights of the Nine quest line where you have to recover the gauntlets of the Crusader. County Chorrol itself is a broader region centred on the town. Economically, the area is known for plentiful mines and timber, with wool and mutton rounding out its exports. Nearby, outside the walls, Wainin Priory functions as a peaceful religious settlement closely tied to the main story during the events of Oblivion. Chorrol's history reaches back into the Merethic and early First Era. The Merethic knight Cadwell is said to have hailed from Chorrol, and by the First Era the city already boasted a chapel to Stendarr with an archbishop named Vincius Imbrex. An Academy of Chorrol existed at some point as a scholarly institution, although very little is recorded about it beyond its name. The first Count of Chorrol, Cantus Geril, gained his title for heroism at the Battle of Pale Pass, tying the county's noble line directly to one of Cyrodiil's key border conflicts. By the Second Era, Chorrol had become a focal point for trade. Merchants gathered beneath the oak in the central space, giving rise to the name Little Oak Place. In this particular time period, Varin Aquilarios served as the Duke of Chorrol. When Emperor Leovic legalised Daedra worship, Varin drew heavily on support from the old Colovian nobility of County Chorrol and the broader Colovian estates, leading a revolt that began with setbacks at Fort Ash but ultimately saw him seize command of the Legion of Chorrol and drive Imperial forces back into the Heartlands. The Soul Burst, also occurring in the Second Era, struck Chorrol hard. Earthquakes tore a fissure through the town. Flame Atronachs infested the chasm and killed the prefect Doran, and constant tremors damaged many buildings, including the Great Chapel. The Oak and Crozier Inn resorted to nailing its furniture to the floor. Wooden walkways were slung across the rift, but toxic fumes led to further deaths. And during the Three Banners War, Chorrol initially lay within Daggerfall Covenant territory, though control of the roads around it was effectively decided by whoever held nearby Fort Rails. After the sack of Sanctuaries, the city placed a statue called the Touch of the Healer's Hand near the gates, depicting the Second Era healer Saint Osla tending the fallen. Locally known simply as the Fountain, it was once surrounded by a pool before drying up by the Third Era. Over time, the district near the entrance took on the name Fountain Gate from that monument. By the late Third Era, Chorrol was firmly established as a county capital. It was ruled by Count Caris Valga and later by his widow, Countess Ariana. A political marriage linked Chorrol and Leyawiin when Lady Alessia of Chorrol wed Count Marius Caro. During the Oblivion Crisis, an Oblivion Gate opened outside Chorrol's walls and the town came under siege by the forces of Mehrunes Dagon, placing it within the same cycle of crises that affected the other county seats. Everyday life in Chorrol during the time of Oblivion revolves around a familiar flavour of locations and services to what we saw in Bruma. Travellers can stay at the Grey Mare or the Oak and Crozier, stable their horses at North County stables, and equip themselves at Fire and Steel or Northern Goods and Trade. Renoir's Books supplies reading material, while Arbor Watch offers a prestigious house for sale in the centre of town. The Fighters Guild and Mages Guild both maintain substantial halls here. On the Fighters Guild side, the hall is the starting point for a long chain of contracts that culminate in the struggle with the Blackwood Company. On the Mages Guild side, Tychius leads a hall that specialises in conjuration magic. Around them, houses belonging to various inhabitants dot the town, giving the place a comfy, lived-in vibe. It's a functioning place, with people coming and going about their business in amongst the bigger and more dramatic happenings during the Oblivion Crisis. As a whole, Chorrol comes across as a town balanced between piety and hard pragmatism. A walled Colovian county seat under the shade of a great oak, guarded by Stendarr's chapel and St. Osla's presence. Not to mention the ever-present help of the hero of Kvatch, its past marked by revolts, earthquakes and Daedric incursions, and its present busy with guild contracts. Mystical legends come to life, and among it all, normal people going about their lives, perhaps completely unaware of the fact that they're living in a city that has survived all of that history. Next, we are going to wander east through the Great Forest, around the Red Ring Road, and finally through the Heartlands over to the next city on our tour. Cheydinhal is nestled in the forested highlands of the Niboney Basin, out on the Blue Road that runs east from the Imperial City towards the Morrowind border. It is the largest settlement in this part of Cyrodiil, surrounded by evergreen woodland and set amongst rising ground. To the north and east, the land climbs into the Chorrol and Vallis mountain ranges, while to the south and west it falls away towards the Greater Nibbenay region, the Heartlands, and the Reed River. That geography makes Cheydinhal feel slightly tucked away in amongst trees and hills. The city itself is defined by water and wood. A river runs north-south through the centre, lined with graceful willows and crossed by quaint bridges. The walls enclose most of the river and an islet in the southern half, so the flow of water is an integral part of the cityscape. Broad green parkland and neatly trimmed streets give Cheydinhal a deliberately manicured look. Even at a glance, it feels more curated than some of the rougher Colovian towns. Cheydinhal is divided into three main districts: Castle Cheydinhal, the Chapel District, and the Market District. From the western gate, the Market District runs as a broad stone-cut avenue. One branch leads north up the hill to Castle Cheydinhal, another heads east across the river into the Chapel District, while the main street continues south past shops and inns. The Fighters Guild and Mages Guild occupy some of the largest buildings along this route. On the western bank, Castle Cheydinhal crowns a rise. This is County Hall, the seat of the Count, with the city guard barracks built along the walls. In the late Third Era, Count Andal Indaris, a Dunmer immigrant from House Thlalu, ruled from here, making Cheydinhal the only Cyrodiilic city with a non-imperial count. The Indaris crest, a tied thorny bramble, is reflected in two key heirlooms, the Staff of Indaris and the Thornblade. The latter doubles as the symbol of the local knightly order, the Knights of the Thorn, founded by Andal's son Farwell. Across the river, the Chapel District is built around the Great Chapel of Arkay, the city's tallest structure. From the mountain trails half a mile north of Cheydinhal, the chapel roof is visible above the tree line. It stands on the riverbank with the graveyard running along the street beside it. The chapel is overseen by the Order of Arkay and a primate who represents the deity on the Council of the Nine. Statues of Arkay and of Galerion the Mystic further clarify the religious and magical identity of the town for anyone who cares to look. At various points in Cheydinhal's history, this chapel was the site of major events, including an Auroran assault and the reconsecration of the Crusader's sword. Cheydinhal did not always look the way it does in the Third Era. For much of its earlier life, it followed the more conventional imperial style common to central Cyrodiil. The major change came with the Dark Elf diaspora. Roughly half a century before Oblivion's events, significant numbers of Dunmer from Morrowind crossed the border and settled here, seeking to leave behind tribunal theocracy and rigid social structures. They brought their own architecture and customs, and Cheydinhal absorbed them to such a degree that it developed a distinctive hybrid style. Most of the houses use a half-timbered design. The lower floor is stone, but the upper levels are carried on exposed wooden beams and struts, packed with plaster arranged in decorative patterns. Roofs sweep up into concave peaks, and the shingles have a scaled appearance. Alessia Otis describes the stonework, glass, metal and wood as striking but still neat and well kept. The result is an imperial city that looks heavily Dunmer influenced without becoming a straight-up copy of a Morrowind town. That Dunmer influence extends beyond the buildings. Cheydinhal hosts celebrations such as St. Jub's Fair, honouring Jub the Eradicator, and it has produced or attracted notable Dunmer figures. Raith Lythandis, for example, a famous painter of Dunmer origin, is one of the city's most unusual residents. Possessing the brush of true paint, he creates landscape paintings that are effectively alternate spaces. Moving back to the layout of the city itself, let's give a little bit more detail about those two familiar key institutions we mentioned earlier. The Mages Guild Hall in Cheydinhal, for instance, focuses on alteration, and the Fighters Guild handles contracts ranging from simple deliveries to investigations around Harlan's Watch and beyond. At street level, Cheydinhal is known for its cleanliness. We remarked on this earlier when we mentioned the manicured look. Beyond that, tourist guides remark that even the poorest citizens are bright and clean, and people are happy to invite visitors to admire their homes. Yet the city's neat surface conceals darker corners. Cheydinhal has an abandoned house, and local stories have emerged around it. Baloth Cull's play Legend of Cratley House is apparently based on this dwelling. More interestingly, beneath this particular abandoned house lies the Cheydinhal Sanctuary of the Dark Brotherhood. It has operated for at least 2 centuries by the time of the Oblivion Crisis. The city's leadership never publicly acknowledges it. The Count, for instance, maintains silence on the matter. There are rumours that he was bribed or that his wife was killed to ensure his silence, but none of these are conclusive. During the Oblivion Crisis, the Black Hand orders the purification of this sanctuary, wiping out its members to root out a traitor, an event later remembered as the Great Treachery of Cheydinhal. The city also features the Knights of the Thorn Lodge, a result of Farwell and Darius's attempt to turn youthful bravado into a chivalric order. Their emblem, the Thorn and Bramble, ties back into the Andaris crest and the Thornblade. The Knights of the Thorn launch a reckless charge into the Cheydinhal Oblivion Gate, suffering heavy losses until the hero of Kvatch intervenes to save Farwell. In gratitude, his father, the Count, offers the hero one of the family heirlooms and later sends Cheydinhal guards to aid in the defence of Bruma. Across eras, we can see that Cheydinhal keeps the same core identity, a Nibonese city that has taken Dunmer architecture and customs into itself. Laid out around a river and a great chapel, governed from a hillside castle, and haunted, literally and figuratively, by the secrets rumoured about, and hidden beneath its abandoned house. Heading down past the Imperial City now, along the Yellow Road and through the Niboney Valley, we come to Leyawiin, which sits on the extreme southeast of Cyrodiil, on the strip of land called the Trans-Nibon, where Elsewhere and Black Marsh meet. The city straddles a swampy estuary of the Nibon, close to the river's mouth where it opens into Topple Bay. It is known as the city that spans the waters, and that is literal. The river passes through the city itself before emptying into the bay to the south. Humid blackwood forest and marshland crowd in around it, and the population reflects that border setting, with a significant number of Khajiit and Argonians alongside its Nibonese citizens. Leyawiin is the main Imperial foothold at this southern crossroads. It lies south of Bravil at the end of the Green Road and controls the point where river traffic and coastal shipping meet. That position has always shaped its politics. In the Second Era, potentate Versailles Shea ordered the city's bridges removed to allow large sailing vessels to pass upriver from Topple Bay to the Nibon. Leyawiin's Chamber of Legates stalled the project, fearing ships would simply sail through without stopping. They succeeded. To this day, vessels too large to pass under the bridges must dock south of the city and offload to smaller riverboats. It's a cool little detail that illustrates how firmly Leyawiin ties its identity to controlling movement rather than allowing traffic to bypass it. The city is divided into 4 districts: the Chapel District, Guild Plaza, Main Street, and Castle Leyawiin. At its heart stands the Great Chapel of Zenithar, dominating the skyline and anchoring the Chapel District. Zenithar's presence here goes back to the early days of the First Era. After Pellinal Whitestrake's death at the end of the Alessian Slave Rebellion, the Mace of the Crusader was carried to Leyawiin. Centuries later, the master craftsman St. Caladas built the Great Chapel as a tribute to that legend. For a time during the Anaquine conquests of Darloch Bray, Khajiit Wander Kings captured the city, and scholars theorise that the chapel was then converted into a Temple of Two Moons dance. That would fit Leyawiin's position as a border city that shifts between Imperial and Elsewhere influence over long stretches of history. Beyond the chapel, the Guild Plaza collects the main institutions of power and trade. The Fighters Guild and Mages Guild both maintain halls here alongside the more controversial Blackwood Company Hall. In the time of Oblivion, the Blackwood Company functions as a mercenary outfit competing with and undermining the Fighters Guild. Their presence in Leyawiin is not neutral decoration. The city is troubled by local bandits and skooma dealers, and the Blackwood Company's methods and contracts tie straight into that atmosphere. Around the guilds lie shops such as Best Goods and Guarantees, Southern Books and the Dividing Line, together with stables and inns like Five Riders Stables, the Five Claws Lodge and the Three Sisters Inn. Castle Leyawiin rises above all this, housing Count Marius Caro and his wife Alessia. House Caro have ruled Leyawiin since the early Second Empire, and Marius continues that line into the late Third Era. The castle also holds the City Watch barracks, and a separate Coast Guard station emphasises the naval angle. This is a river city that must think about smuggling, piracy and cross-border movement as much as land-based crime. The City Watch and the Leyawiin Guard are drawn into anything that touches that border tension, from skooma runs to banditry. Leyawiin's symbolism reinforces its character. The city's ancient emblem is a white horse on a green field, known as the Ivory Horse or the White Stallion. Its exact origin is unknown. One tradition links it to Pelennor Whitestrake, another claims that in mythic times Leyawiin was home to a shining white horse of divine strength and beauty who protected its riverbanks. In either case, the connection between horse, river and protection is clear enough. In the Third Era, the Knights of the White Stallion draw directly on this imagery. The city also venerates Topple the Pilot as a patron saint, with a statue of him standing by the southwest wall. It's no mistake that this imagery is so front and centre. The Third Era is a bit of a time of strife for the city. The Transnibbon is annexed back into Cyrodiil and County Leyawiin by agreement between the Main and the Empire, but not everyone accepts that peacefully. The Renrijra Kryn, Khajiit bandits and freedom fighters aim to reclaim all land along the Transnibbon, believing it rightfully belongs to elsewhere. They blame Count Marius Caro for driving Khajiit from fertile land. Within the city itself, there is already a considerable Khajiit and Argonian population. As more Argonians and Dunmer arrive, racial tension becomes a problem. Marius Caro responds by trying to push Nibonese culture, nudging Leyawiin towards a more mainstream imperial identity, at least in appearance. On the ground, that produces the mix seen in Oblivion, a Nibonese city with a chapel to Zenithar at its centre, House Caro in the castle, and a guard force that works alongside and against the Blackwood Company while dealing with smuggling and skooma. At the same time, streets and inns are filled with Khajiiti and Argonian names: Adarje, Darji, Jabari, Mahe, Weebumna, and many others. The result of all this is a city that feels neither purely imperial nor dominated by any one of its border cultures. During the Oblivion Crisis, Leyawiin is besieged, as with all the other cities targeted by Mehrunes Dagon's forces. As with the rest of Cyrodiil, its chapel, count and guilds all become wrapped up in the wider crisis. And yet, for a visitor, the underlying vibe of Leyawiin remains. A settlement defined by water, borders and trade, trying to assert Nibonese order in a humid, contested strip of land between two other provinces. Over time, ruling houses rise and fall, legates gain and lose influence, and empires change, but the city that spans the waters keeps reappearing as a place that has to manage more than one culture and more than one set of claims on the land beneath its bridges. Travelling north now, we find Bravil, which sits low and damp in the Nibony Valley on the northern shore of Nibbon Bay. The green road curves around it on its way between the Imperial City and Leyawiin, but Bravil feels a step removed from the clean white stone of the Heartlands. The Larzius River loops through and around the settlement before emptying into the bay. From a distance you see crooked wooden buildings stacked up along the water, bridges and walkways stitched together over muddy channels. Close up, it's easy to see why guidebooks keep calling it the poorest city in Cyrodiil. That poverty runs through almost every description of the place. Bravil's houses are simple wooden constructions, often piled on top of each other with warped planks and sagging roofs. The climate does them no favours. Marshes and swamps surround the city, and the bay keeps the air perpetually damp. You can almost feel the rot in the supports and the mould on the walls. Where Chorrol gives you a clean stone plaza and a great oak, and Cheydinhal offers neat parkland along the Corbolo, Bravil offers leaning shacks, rickety walkways, and the knowledge that the brown water below your feet is carrying away everything the town does not want to think about. And yet, in the middle of all that, the great chapel of Mara dominates the skyline. It rises above the wooden roofs and narrow alleys, a solid anchor of stone and faith. Mara's chapel makes sense here. For a town that has slid down the social scale over the centuries, a goddess of love and compassion is a natural focus. Inside, priests tend to the faithful, offering restoration magic and counsel. East of the chapel stands the feature everyone remembers, the statue of the lucky old lady. It is older than the current city, a relic dating back thousands of years. The book Daughter of the Niben tells the story behind it, a woman born into poverty on the river who became famous for her kindness, calling herself a child of luck, after being told Stendar was her divine father. When she showed charity to an incognito prince cursed by witches, she was rewarded with riches and shared them with Bravil. The statue stands for that version of the story, a reminder that even here, in one of Cyrodiil's poorest corners, generosity can change a city's fortunes. There is more to this statue though, we'll look into that a bit later on. The rest of the town follows that same pattern of rough edges and small comforts. There are two main inns, Silverholm on the Water and the Lonely Suitor Lodge. There is a cluster of small businesses, the Archer's Paradox for bows, the Fair Deal for general goods, a Warlock's Luck for alchemy and spells, Bayron Stables out by the road. The Fighters Guild and Mages Guild both have modest halls here, carrying on the same provincial pattern you see across Cyrodiil. Even the poorer towns get at least one guild presence and a chapel because they are still part of the Imperial network. The local nobility sits on a different level. Castle Bravil and its beautiful garden look down over the town, and Count Regulus Terentius occupies that position in name at the least. He is arrogant and disengaged, and his son Gellius is known for frequenting the skooma den tucked away in the back streets. Bravil's official ruler embodies the gap between the county's theoretical status and the lived reality of its citizens. The Larsius runs through the city as a sewer, the houses are falling apart, and the Count's household is more concerned with its own indulgence than the state of the streets. The skooma den we mentioned a few moments ago fits Bravil's situation almost perfectly. A low-lying port in a poor valley with river access and plenty of places to hide shipments is exactly the sort of place where skooma trafficking and smuggling take root. By the late Third Era, Bravil has that reputation firmly attached to it. You are dealing with a place that has a skooma den so obvious it is a Count's son stumbling in and out of it. Underneath all this sits something older. Bravil stands on the site of a large Ayleid settlement. The valley around Niben Bay was once a tropical region enclosed by equatorial forest, and the Ayleids here treated it as home. Math or Haim in Ayleidun. They benefited from the Niben as a food source and trade route, and their settlement beneath present-day Bravil was more populous than the modern town. That history ended when the Alessian army, under Empress Alessia's centurion Teo Bravilius Tazus, attacked the Ayleids in the First Era. According to Daughter of the Niben, they used powerful alteration magic to defend themselves until Tazus learned to counter it, and the town later took his name as Bravil. After the Ayleids were pushed out, the Nibene Valley shifted into a different kind of power. Under the Alessian Order, restrictions on meat eating and animal cults made traditional agriculture difficult, so Eastern Imperials turned to trade instead. Cities here became mercantile magocracies enriched by river commerce and magical expertise. For a time, Bravil and its neighbours were among the wealthiest city-states in the region, even if they were still subordinate to the Alessian priesthood. When the War of Righteousness ended Alessian dominance, control of the valley reverted to those mercantile elites. From a Western Colovian viewpoint, the Nibini cities remained too arcane for any simple reunification. That long arc explains why Bravil can feel like a fallen place in the late Third Era. It used to be an Iliad home, then part of a wealthy Nibinese trade network. By Oblivion, what you see in-game is a squalid town of wooden shacks, with the Larsius pressed into service as an open sewer. The remnants of that mercantile magical past are still there: the Mages Guild Hall, the alchemy shop, the chapel, the strange Iliad depths under the streets. But they sit in a city where most people are worrying about skooma, debt and damp, not about anything grander or more mystical. The Oblivion crisis, of course, reaches Bravil like everywhere else. The county contributes to allies for Bruma, sending troops north under Count Regulus's banner. Compared to the Great Gate outside Bruma, Bravil's brush with the crisis feels minor, but that fits the town's role. It is a place where the big events of the era arrive in diluted form, filtered through poverty and distance from the Imperial City. The Dark Brotherhood gives Bravil one of its seedier undercurrents, if that's even possible. On the surface, the lucky old lady we looked at earlier is a kindly local saint figure. In reality, the statue stands above the crypt of the Night Mother. The statue functions as a conduit. Prayers whispered to the lucky old lady are heard by the Night Mother herself. It's kind of wild, actually. The one thing that feels like uncomplicated good fortune in Bravil is literally built over a shrine to murder. And thus, however you look at it, Bravil remains the low, damp city on the Niben, defined by its seediness and shabbiness, shaped in eras past by older ruins beneath it, and caught seemingly forever between kindness and brutality. The Chapel of Mara and the lucky old lady above, the crypt of the Night Mother and the skooma wars below. Continuing north on the Green Road and then west on the Gold Road, we come across the next city on our tour. Skingrad sits on the Gold Road between the Imperial City and Kvatch, but it feels a world away from the damp lowlands of Bravil or the border tension around Leyawiin. This is Uber Colovia vibes: dry golden countryside, neat fields and vineyards rolling out into the West Weald, and a town that looks like it cares very much about tidy streets, strong walls and everything in its proper place. In terms of layout, Skingrad is a straightforward but carefully planned settlement. The Gold Road runs through the centre of the city, forming the spine around which everything is built. To the north of the road we have the business district, the Fighters Guild and Mages Guild halls. The Mages Guild here, I should point out, focuses on destruction magic. Colovian traders, the Hammer and Tongs Forge, the Westweald Inn, all cluster around that area. A pair of stone bridges carry you over to the southern side, where the houses and the great chapel of Julianos sit behind their own wall. It is the complete opposite of the ramshackle layering you see in Bravil. Here the divisions are clear: work on one side, quiet homes and worship on the other. Apart from the Two Sisters Lodge, of course, which is on the southern side. The chapel's dedication has significance. Julianos is the god of wisdom and logic, and Skingrad certainly has that vibe. The place has a slightly austere feel compared to more decorative Nibini cities. Stone walls are clean and uncluttered, the streets are wide enough for carts to pass, and the guards are better equipped than anywhere else in Cyrodiil. Steel greaves, boots and gauntlets instead of the usual chainmail. Under Count Janus Hasseldor, crime, gambling and public drunkenness are said to be rare, and you do get that impression. The city feels ordered and well run, with very little obvious chaos. Just outside the walls we can see the prosperity funding this. Skingrad is the wine capital of Cyrodiil. The vineyards of Tamika and the Cyrodiil brothers spread out across the West Weald. Rows of vines, presses tucked behind farmhouses and bottles turning up on tables and in cellars all over the province. Locals will argue over whose wine is better. The usual answer is that Tamika's vintages are every bit as good as the Cyrodiil brothers, while David himself admits hers are finer but more expensive. Either way, Skingrad's reputation rests on grapes, tomatoes, and cheese as much as on stone and steel. That prosperity shows up in the player-facing details. Rosethorn Hall, the house you can buy in Skingrad, is the largest and most expensive property available. Once you hand over the gold to the steward Vanderalen Trebatius, the manor becomes a showcase of what Colovian wealth looks like. Multiple floors, a private cellar, and the option to hire a housekeeper. If you want your character to feel like an upper-class landowner anywhere in Cyrodiil, this is where you get to do it. And above all this, literally and politically, is Castle Skingrad. The castle stands outside the main walls on its own hill, overlooking the town and the West Weald. It is an impressive sight from almost any approach, battlements, towers, and a direct visual reminder that this is a Colovian stronghold first and a market town second. Inside lives Count Janus Hasseldor, a wizard and, as the Mages Guild know, a vampire. He has ruled for far longer than a normal human lifespan would allow. He rarely appears in public, communicating through his Argonian steward Howliers and trusted agents, but when events demand it, during the Oblivion Crisis or when the Mages Guild needs high-level information, he is sharp, pragmatic, and more interested in keeping his county safe than in imperial politics. That contrast between orderly surface and hidden strangeness runs through Skingrad. On a casual walk around town, it presents as the gem of old Colovia, with a statue of King Rislav the Righteous in Hightown celebrating the old Colovian tradition of resisting outside control. Look a little closer though, and there are oddities. Nerasteril's house, for instance, sits on the main street like any other townhouse, but if you go inside you find it full of undead. The owner is gone, the doors are locked from the outside, and skeletons and zombies wander through the rooms. There is no quest marker drawing you there, it exists as a self-contained bit of horror in a city that otherwise prides itself on law and order. Summit Mist Manor is normal until you accept a contract from the Dark Brotherhood. Then it becomes the setting for Whodunit, a locked-in murder scenario where you are hired to remove every guest at a dinner party without any of them realising what's happening. Skingrad's orderly vibes make an effective foil for that kind of sealed, human-scale nastiness. Even the shops have the potential for their own weird rumours. All Things Alchemical is run by Falanu Lalu, an alchemist whose casual interest in the properties of body parts and embalming leads to in-game conversation with her about some questionable activities with those no longer with us. Then there is Glarthir, a wood elf convinced there is a conspiracy against him, watching his neighbours from the chapel steps, pulling you into his delusions and forcing you to decide how far you are willing to humour him. Depending on your choices, multiple ordinary townsfolk can end up leaving the mortal realm permanently. Or Glarthir himself is a goner. Skingrad gives you a clean, respectable backdrop for the game to drop a quest like this into it to see how the town and the player react. Historically, that tension between order and chaos actually fits Skingrad's history in Cyrodiil quite well. Whether intentional or not narratively, I can't say, but it's interesting to note. In the First Era, kings like Rislav Larik led the Colovian estates in resisting the Alessian order, helping to end the theocracy that dominated the Nibini Valley. Later, Colovia repeatedly pulled back from over-centralised rule in the east, keeping its own identity intact until a strong emperor returned. Skingrad's culture, independent, hard-working, uninterested in fuss, comes straight out of that background. By the late Third Era under Hasseldor, that tradition has turned into a very practical form of governance, and yet with some secrets behind it all. Somehow, to me, Skingrad feels like the most grown-up of Cyrodiil's cities. It is prosperous, and yet a bit stranger than it first appears. Continuing west on the Gold Road, we come across the ruins of Kvatch, which is, or was, another Colovian city between Anvil and Skingrad. The first time you see it in Oblivion though, the sky is burning and the area is full of fleeing refugees who talk about the end of the world. Even in ruins, you can still make out the bones of what Kvatch once was. The location is very Colovian, a strong hilltop position, walls wrapping around the crest, a castle looming over the rest of the town. County Kvatch stretches far out to the northwest, all the way to the Bruma River and Hammerfell border, so this was never a small provincial stop. This was a regional centre, watching the passes and controlling a big slice of the Gold Coast hinterland. The city's banner shows a black direwolf on grey, and the statue in the main plaza, Antis Pinder, sword raised, frozen mid-defence, makes it clear that Kvatch's identity is wrapped up in the idea of standing firm against impossible odds. That statue is one of the first things you see once you fight through the gate and enter the upper city. The plaza around it, where market stalls and crowds ought to be, is wreckage and ash. The chapel quarter, which should be the religious heart of the city, is full of corpses and shell-shocked survivors who barely managed to bar the doors before the Daedra came through the streets. Kvatch's great chapel is dedicated to Akatosh, the dragon god of time and chief of the 8 or 9 divines. During the Oblivion crisis, the fact that the chapel of Akatosh survives as the one intact communal space inside the ruined city gives the whole main quest a wee bit of symbolism. Akatosh's last heir is here, his followers are here, the walls are still standing, even as everything around them burns. Before the crisis, Kvatch had the same institutions you find in the other cities, chapel, guilds, castle, but arranged in its own way to fit the hill. From the lower approach on the Gold Coast, the skyline would have been dominated by the tall chapel tower. In lore terms, Kvatch is one of the older Colovian powers. In the First Era, kings like Justinius and the rulers of Skingrad went from fighting each other to standing side by side against the Alessian Order. In the days when the Alessian doctrines were reshaping Cyrodiil, Kvatch was run by a regency council with figures like Lord Nunex Valeria steering it through the shift from Ayleid dominance to human rule. By the Second Era, Kvatch had become the centre of the Order of the Hour, Akatosh's warrior priests, and a kind of religious military hub for the Gold Coast. The Order has its own ugly history here, cracking down on protest during bad harvests, slaughtering an angry mob on the cathedral steps when red wheat blight sends people into panic. Later, these same knights defend the city from marauders and orcish warbands. Count Varin Aquilarios, the same Varin who later leads the revolt against Emperor Leyawiin, rules from Kvatch before he marches on the Imperial City, leaving his nephew Carolus to hold the place with a single cohort. Carolus resists pressure from outside powers, fights off attacks from Anvil, and ends up as the dominant figure on the Gold Coast after figures like Fortunata ap Dugal and Primate Artorius are removed. All of that gives Kvatch a very particular flavour in the Second Era, a hard-edged religious city whose symbol, the dire wolf, sits alongside the Dragon of Akatosh and the Dragon of the Empire. When you arrive in the Third Era, all of that history is buried under the current catastrophe. You meet Salvian Matthias, a captain of the guard who has seen his city destroyed in a single night and is still trying to hold a line at the city gate. Close the Oblivion Gate and the guards surge forward to reclaim the streets. Push on into the castle and you find Count Ormelius Goldwine dead, his lineage cut off, his court wiped out. Every other major city in Cyrodiil has a stable everyday version that you pass through repeatedly. Kvatch, on the other hand, is permanently in crisis or a state of aftermath. So Kvatch ends up serving a double role in a tour of Cyrodiil's towns. On the one hand, it is another Colovian stronghold with its own banner, plugged into the same broad history as Skingrad, Anvil and the rest of the West. On the other hand, it is the place where you see what happens when that whole structure is hit head-on by Mehrunes Dagon. Our next stop, Anvil, is where Cyrodiil reaches the Abyssinian, the end of the Gold Road. If the Imperial City is the Empire's head, Anvil is one of the hands. Ships coming in from Hammerfell, High Rock and beyond touch this harbour first before anything ever reaches the Imperial City. In terms of vibes, Anvil feels sunny and relaxed. The walls are warm stone, the roofs curve in ways that echo nearby Hammerfell, and the gulls and rigging creak in the harbour outside the south gate. Redguard influence is obvious in the architecture, rounded arches, flat roofs, and that sense that the city is as much looking west to the Abyssean as it is back inland. Inside the walls, the main district is laid out in neat tiers. This is where you find the usual anchors of an imperial town: the Chapel of Dibella, the Anvil Fighters Guild, the local Mages Guild with its restoration focus, the Count's Arms Inn, merchants selling weapons, armour and general supplies. The Chapelgate district clusters around the Chapel of Dibella, whose tall tower dominates the skyline. Across the street from the chapel is the graveyard, and Benris Manor sits on slightly higher ground. On the face of it, it is prime real estate, big, stately, perfect for a wealthy merchant. However, in reality, every local knows the place is wrong somehow. Lorgren Benris's failed lich ritual in the late Third Era leaves the whole house steeped in resentment and trapped spirits. Head south through the gate and we get a bit of a different tone. Outside the walls, Harbourside is lower, rougher and more transient. The flowing bowl sits by the water, run by Twin Altmer with slightly too slick a charm. The forecastle is a shipboard flophouse, the sea tub Clarabella rocks at anchor with its own smuggling problems, and the Serpent's Wake lies in the bay with something very wrong in its hold. Castle Anvil itself is not actually attached to the city. It stands on an island further out, linked by a causeway on top of the buried wreck of the Black Flag. Earlier in the Third Era, this was Old Anvil, red sabre pirates, shacks and a fortress turned into a nest for raiders. Commodore Facial Umbranox burned that down during his campaign against Torridon ap Dogal and was rewarded with the title of Count and the funds to build a proper city over the ashes. He had Castle Anvil constructed on the same rock where the Black Flag lies entombed. Later, when you clear out Dunbarrow Cove and put the undead crew to rest, you are poking at the foundations of both the castle and the county's modern history. That sense of new respectability over older chaos runs through Anvil's backstory. In the First Era, Bendu Olo sailed from here to lead the All Flags Navy against Thras, turning what had been a violent little pirate haven into a seat of an Admiral King. In the Second Era, the city declared itself a free port after the fall of the Second Empire and ended up under Fortunata ap Dogal's control. A pirate captain styling herself provincial governor, claiming dominion over the Gold Coast and coming into direct conflict with Kvatch, which stayed loyal to the Heartland. By the late Third Era, Count Corvus Umbranox has vanished, his wife Malona rules in his place. When the Thieves Guild storyline comes to a head and you steal the Elder Scroll in the ultimate heist, you eventually discover that the stranger in the abandoned house was Corvus all along. The Grey Fox, cursed by Nocturnal's cowl, whose identity is written out of history until you help break that curse and restore him. Religiously, Anvil belongs to Dibella. The Chapel of Dibella is the most prominent holy building in the city and becomes the flashpoint for the Knights of the Nine story. The prophet who starts you on the quest line can be spoken to across the road after the chapel has been desecrated by Aurorans under the command of Umaril the Unfeathered. Anvil is therefore where that whole Crusader arc begins, a bright coastal city whose temple to beauty and art has been smashed, with a half-mad seer calling for a champion outside shattered doors. Between that, the cursed manor up the hill and the haunted ship in the bay, Anvil ends up being the most supernatural of the Colovian cities in Oblivion, without ever losing its grounded sense of being a working harbour. Then there is the Mermaid. In the Guildgate district stands the Brine Maiden, a stone mermaid statue with no inscription, no surviving record of its commissioning, and no clear origin. It might predate the current city entirely. So, if the vibe of the Gold Coast is that sense of old stone facing a restless sea, Anvil is where you see it most clearly. You have the formal Colovian castle sitting on top of a pirate grave, a Dibellan chapel whose priestesses have had to face down Daedric invaders. A city square that ignores the mermaid as a boring bit of decoration when it's entirely possible she is older than the streets around her. It is a prosperous harbour now with guild contracts and fine properties and even finer wine, but the supernatural side is never far away. There is only one city in Cyrodiil that calls itself simply the City. The Imperial City sits on City Isle in the middle of Lake Rumaire, a near-perfect circle of stone and white marble at the geographical and political centre of the province. Roads radiate out from it in every direction. The red ring road encircles it. From above, the design is deliberate, concentric authority, all lines pointing inward to a single tower. And what is that tower? Well, it's called the White Gold Tower, older than the empire that now rules from it. Built in the Merethic era by the earliest Aldmeri settlers, originally called the Temple of the Ancestors, it predates Alesia, the Septums and the Mede dynasty alike. When you walk Green Emperor Way, you are walking around something that once belonged to the Aelids. The 10 ancestor statues that once stood within were removed during the Alessian Rebellion. Pelinal fought Umaril atop this tower. Morihos shook it. Riemann was crowned here. Tiber Septim claimed it. Martin Septim shattered the amulet of kings beneath it. Every era leaves a mark on the same stone. Green Emperor Way surrounds the tower, manicured gardens, mausoleums, and the Imperial Palace complex. Topiary busts of past emperors line the parks, magically animated to offer counsel should an emperor need it. Burials of counts, saints, and battle mages sit in stone tombs around the palace perimeter. The space feels controlled and ceremonial. Guards patrol openly. Politics lives here. In the time of Oblivion, the Elder Council meets here, dealing with the repercussions of the Emperor's death and the Oblivion Crisis. Encircling that inner ring are 6 principal districts, each with a defined character. The Market District sits northeast. It's the commercial heart of the Empire. Armourers, alchemists, booksellers, jewellers, and food stalls are in abundance. During the interregnum, it was briefly converted into a graveyard known as the Memorial District, but in the Third Era, it's back to noise, trade, and competition. Anything in Cyrodiil can be bought here. The Arena District has a narrower focus. The Imperial Arena, founded in the First Era under Gaiden Shinji, dominates the quarter. It is called the Bloody Jewel of the City. Spectators pack the stands to watch challengers rise through the ranks under Owen's supervision, culminating in Agranak Gromalog, the Grey Prince. Beneath the Bloodworks, the sewers run redder than elsewhere, and in earlier eras the arena has hosted everything from Akaviri Jewels to Daedric entertainments during the Plane Meld. It is spectacle institutionalized. The Arboretum to the southeast is quieter, botanical gardens, statues of the Divines, and the Imperial Academy of Records and Histories sit here. It's where scribes catalogue lineage and charters. During the Second Era, Daedra attempted to burn the archives here, and in the Third Era, it is simply a green pause between stone districts, the statue of Talos standing central among the Divines. The Temple District in the southwest holds the Temple of the One. This is the site of the Dragonfire ritual, the physical symbol of Akatosh's covenant with Alesia. Pelagius Septim was murdered here in the very early years of the Third Era. The Soul Burst was triggered here in the Second Era when Mana Marco corrupted Varin Aquilarios' coronation. And at the dusk of the Third Era, Martin Septim breaks the Amulet of Kings here and becomes the avatar of Akatosh and ending the Oblivion Crisis. The statue that remains in the Temple of the One is not ornamental, it marks the exact point where the Empire almost ended. Talos Plaza District, formerly the Nobles District, houses the wealthy, no surprises there. The Tiber Septim Hotel stands here, the most expensive inn in the city. Manors line the streets. Collectors hoard Aeliad artifacts. During the Plane Meld, a group known as the Immortal Eight held a garrison here against Molag Bal's forces. In the Third Era, this is where nobles debate relics and reputations while the Empire frays at the edges. The Elven Gardens district in the northwest is primarily residential. It houses rival scholars and fences alike. Policies from the Elder Council once improved sanitation here. Later, Legion Zero operates from its streets during the interregnum. In Oblivion, it is where Umbacano attempts to resurrect Iliad kingship by manipulating relics like the crown of Nenalata. Separate from the main ring of the city are three key extensions: the Arcane University, the Prison District, and the Waterfront. The Arcane University, seat of the Mages Guild, is physically distinct and fortified. Archmage Hannibal Traven rules from here at the time of Oblivion. It is an academic fortress in the middle of Imperial authority. The Imperial Prison sits at the edge of the city and leads directly into the sewer system. Emperor Uriel Septim VII dies in a hidden passage beneath it, assassinated by the Mythic Dawn. The Waterfront district is physically attached yet socially separate. It is a poverty-stricken place filled with shacks. The Thieves Guild operates here under Armand Christophe, and Argonians dwell here in larger numbers than within the inner walls. It is the capital's underbelly. Culturally, the Imperial City is described as the heart of Tamriel and the city of 1,000 cults. The cult of the Ancestor Moth operates here, for instance, and shrines to obscure sects crowd the Temple District. But it's also something else, something more abstract, something to do with concentration and confluence. Everything intersects here. Other cities feel like self-contained counties, whereas the Imperial City feels like a nexus pulling in everything and anything. Walk the Red Ring Road and you circle the Empire's memory, and more before even that. And above those memories rises the White Gold Tower, itself a mystery all of its own. It is, in a word, iconic. I should add, I am planning a more in-depth exploration of the Imperial City specifically. Take this as a taster and also for completion's sake in this specific video. So there we have it, folks. We've finished our tour of the lovely, comfy, sometimes beautiful major settlements of Oblivion. I hope you enjoyed this relaxed journey through the geography, history and culture of these areas. It's been fun to kick back a little from the thorough investigations and just soak up the vibes. So with that, I'll leave it here and I'll see you in the next video.